Do you want to explore your worlds without being hyper vigilant all the time and your inventory looking something like this? Do you want to work on your perimeter without being bothered by stupid slimes all the time? Do you want to be able to run your tunnel bore just under a cave without a creeper falling down on your head and destroying all your hard work? In that case, you need a mob switch. Hi, I'm Borkon. So this is the mob switch I built in my survival worlds behind me, and the very short description of what it does is I flick this lever, and now no mobs will be able to spawn in my world. I turn it off again, and now mobs can spawn normally. There are some exceptions and various rules we need to follow, but that's basically it. Let's go into a creative world that will be in the world download that you can get in the description of this video, and I'll show you how it works and how you can build your own. So, how can we turn off mob spawning without actually changing the difficulty of the game? Because the difficulty of the game was still hard, and I can still prevent all mobs from spawning. It is something that we are calling mob cap. And mob cap is a limit of how many hostile mobs there can be on the server. A mob cap is per player, so for every player that is currently online, up to 70 mobs can spawn. So if we can have 70 hostile mobs anywhere in the world, no other mobs can spawn. Now, that is very easy to say, but how do we get 70 mobs anywhere in the world? Normal mobs will despawn if you get away from them far enough away. There are several ways to prevent that. For example, you can give a mob a name tag, or you can give them an item to hold, and those mobs will never despawn, but they are also not counted towards mob cap. As far as I know, there are only 3 options. Option 1 is withers. Withers count towards mob cap, and they will not despawn. So, the simplest mob switch you can make is to spawn 70 withers and just run away really fast. And then, using some other means, we'll get to that in a minute, you can load the area and just stay far away from it. I think it's too dangerous, I think it's a crazy idea, but some people are using large amounts of withers as a mob switch. This is not what we're gonna do today. Another mob that counts towards mob cap and doesn't despawn are shulkers. If you can get shulkers to the overworld, build a mob switch around them, that's also great. In this mob switch, we're going to be using the simplest of all the mobs that don't despawn but still count towards mob cap. And it is zombified villagers that you have traded with. Normally, zombified villagers will despawn, but they will not despawn if you have traded with them. So, a mob switch can be built by trading with 70 villagers per player, and zombifying them and putting them somewhere. Let's start by figuring out how we can zombify a large amount of villagers and send them further to the mob switch. So I like to build my systems relatively modular, and in this case this has a villager breeder and a zombificator. These two are integrated, but then you can do various other things with the villagers. You can send them there, you don't even have to zombify them if you don't want to. But this system is designed mostly for the mob switch. The villager breeder here is a design apparently by Invisible Spider, but I actually got it from Surprise T's Villager Trading Hall. That's where I borrowed this whole design from, and the only thing I actually changed is the color of the glass. Everything else is pretty much the same as in her video. But the interesting part is how we zombify the villagers. So, we start by, well, having a bunch of emeralds in our pockets. I am using a stone cutter because I want these guys to be masons, because, well, I can use the bricks anyway, so why not just get some bricks in the process? I enable the system. A villager lands here, and unfortunately sometimes it takes quite a while for them to pick up the station, but this guy now picked up the station, and now we need to zombify him. I open this hatch. There is a drowned here with a trident. The drowned shoots tridents at the villager, and as soon as the villager gets zombified, the next one gets sent in, I can trade with him, and this process should just keep going. Sometimes, unfortunately, since it takes a while for them to pick up the workstation, I need to stop the drowned. But in general, this can be done basically just trade with the villager as soon as he picks up the workstation, and the drowned will zombify him a few seconds later. Now, once the villager has been zombified, it's sent further, but we're gonna talk about this bit later. You can disable this machine just by leaving a villager here. So a villager that hasn't been zombified will not despawn. So you can just leave a villager here for however long you want, and you'll be fine. Otherwise, you can just flick this switch and get rid of the villager and the minecart. The minecarts, by the way, come back here and go up this rail into this cactus here and get recycled into this dispenser for dispensing more minecarts for picking up the villagers. Now, this setup here, like I said, uses a drowned with a trident, but if you don't want to use a drowned or don't have access to tridents, there is another option, and I have just built this optional system here. I'll be honest, I use the drowns with tridents because I have had so much trouble using a zombie with an axe, but I have figured out, I don't know if I'm just lucky or this guy is very efficient, and yeah, let's try him out. Oh, that was my last villager. Yeah, that was fast. I didn't even have time to trade with the guy. Now, if we run out of villagers, as you can see, we need to stop the machine, otherwise the minecarts will keep going. But this is an alternative setup with a zombie with an axe, and to be honest, it's much faster than that one. And this is the first time I'm actually managed to make a zombificator with a zombie with an axe. So maybe this is what I'm gonna use in the future. But the only difference is if we have a zombie or if we have a drowned, and how we hide access to it. Because here we hide the access to the zombie with a lever and a trapdoor, and there we move a block with a piston. I should also mention that your game should be on hard difficulty, because if you're in normal difficulty, instead of zombifying the villager, there's a 50% chance that the zombie or the drowned will kill the villager. And on easy, you cannot get zombie villagers like this. Every time the zombie or the drowned will just kill them. So the game should be on hard difficulty. So now we have zombified villagers. Let's see what we can do with them. Now, the question you might have is, how do we turn a mob switch on and off? So it wouldn't be a mob switch if it didn't have a switch. And for this, there are basically two options. Option number one, this is what I have done in my survival world here in the Nether. And it is just to collect all the zombified villagers into one big hole. And they are quite funny when they all try to follow me. And nearby I have a chunk loader that loads this chunk. And when the chunk is loaded, nothing can spawn in the Nether. And speaking of the Nether, this is why this machine has a portal here and this switch here. If we have this switch on, then all the zombified villagers will be just kicked into this portal, and in the Nether you would just drop them into a hole where you would have your Nether mob switch. If you want to make a very simple mob switch which is just chunk loader, or if you want to have a mob switch in the Nether, you would be using a chunk loader, maybe like this one. I will link to the video where I explain this chunk loader. And you would be keeping your zombified villagers in this blue area here. So the blue area, if we show chunks, the chunk loader is in this chunk. That's where the portal is. And then it is 1, 2, and on the third chunk out. That's where you keep the zombified villagers, because here they would be taking no processing time. In the yellow area here, they probably wouldn't take that much processing time either, but this is the best. You want to have a little bit from the chunk loader. Definitely do not keep them in the chunk where the chunk loader is, or the chunk next to it, because that will just eat a lot of CPU on your server. But if you put them right here and then turn on and off the chunk loader, that will give you a mob switch, and this is the perfect setup to use in the Nether. In the overworld it works too, but this is me we're talking about. We want a little bit more complicated machine because they are more fun. So, let's see how this machine works. Let's get a villager and follow it, because that's the easiest way to explain what's going on here. And the villager is going on the rails here. The rails can be laid out any way you want. You can have the mob switch next to the zombifier, or you can have the mob switch very far away. As long as the minecarts keep moving, you should be fine. So we saw the villager come here, it dropped down here, and this activator rail here kicked out the villager from the minecart on top of this trapdoor, where it landed on that string. That string got detected by this observer here, which opened the trapdoor so that the zombie villager fell down into this pod where we already have a few of them. Now, the easiest way to build a machine like this, and look at my Let's Play series where I actually designed this one, there will be a link in the description, where I talk more about the design process of this thing. But in short, the easiest way to do this is to just put 24 villagers in there, remove this activator rail and put it down here and keep going. But rather than that, we have a whole contraption here with a piston feed tape to move the activator rail between the pods every time we put 24 villagers into a pod, and that's what this dropper clock or pulse divider is for, because that's as many zombie villagers that we want to have per pod. This little contraption here has space for 7 pods, which should add up to more than 140 villagers, so this should be enough for 2 players. The reason why we have space for more than 140 villagers that would be required for 2 players is that mistakes do happen. I have sent unzombified villagers into this thing and then they got zombified by these guys, but that doesn't really work because they will despawn. Or I have sent zombified villagers that I didn't trade with because, well, you get absent-minded once you're starting to zombify 140 villagers. Another problem you should look out for is that if you maybe kill something or maybe remove a block and then put it back, and instead of putting it back, one of these guys picks it up. Once they pick up an item, they will no longer count the mob cap. So that's why we have some kind of margin. If you need mob switches for more than 2 players, so this is a 2-player module, just build more modules. And then you will have to reroute the rails to it. But this one should handle everything pretty much automatically. You probably want to move this switch somewhere else, because this is the switch that will be turning the mob switch on and off. Also, after you've filled a pod and before you enable the mob switch for the first time, it is a good idea, it's not strictly necessary, but it is a good idea to flick this lever, because it will cover the zombies with a trapdoor, preventing them from jumping up and down. It doesn't matter when they are on honey, but this is honey and this is slime, and the ones on slime bounce up quite a lot. And if you can see here, they have maybe a small chance of jumping up on this iron block, and then they would be in the wrong position for the mob switch to work. It's not a huge deal, but it can definitely be solved by just closing the trapdoors over their heads and we will be fine. But you may wonder, why does a simple movement of zombified villagers matter, and how does this make it a mob switch? The magic is in where we actually are. The spawn chunks are here. Right now, if we show chunk borders, the zombified villagers are on a chunk border, and they are in this chunk. These chunks here are spawn chunks. These chunks here aren't. So by just moving the zombified villagers 1 block like this, we are moving them into the spawn chunks. Now, I will not explain exactly how spawn chunks work. I can link you to another video I made about this topic. But your best bet is to just use the mini HUD mod and use it to show spawn chunks. And the mini HUD mod shows the fully processing spawn chunks with this green border. Then there is another chunk here which is redstone processing but not entity processing. And then there is this chunk here at the edge with this red border that is loaded but is not processing, and that's where we want to have the zombified villagers. So they're on the edge of this red border here, and if we move them in, they are now inside. And now the mob switch is off, and now the mob switch is on. It's that simple. Now, I won't go into too many details about how this machine works. Everything should be relatively clear. But in short, minecart comes in here, falls down on the rails here. Activate the rail kicks out zombie villagers on top of this trapdoor. String detects that. Through this observer and some redstone, we open the trapdoor. The zombie villager falls down. The trapdoors in every pod are there so we can keep the villagers inside the pod. And the reason why we're using a trapdoor here and not a retracting block is because otherwise there is a chance that the zombie villagers falling down in front of this observer would be landing on the trapdoor above. The trapdoors up here are to prevent the zombie villagers from running around here, because that can happen and then they will not fall through the trapdoors. The mechanism here is a piston feed tape that moves the rails around, mostly just to move the activator rail around. We need to have the redstone blocks here because we need to power the activator rail wherever it happens to be. This is a pulse divider that detects every time the trapdoors opens and closes, which means that all the items start in this dropper here, they move into this dropper, and once the items have made a full round trip between these two droppers, we push the piston feed tape one step forward and throw the zombie villagers into the next pod. I will also mention that the idea for the piston feed tape, even though I'm the piston feed tape maniac, the idea actually came from Salandora when I was designing this on stream, which was a very fun idea, and I quickly jumped on it because it's great. And she also showed me how to do this, where the minecart falls through the soul sand, gets picked up by this rail, and goes back into the breeder zombifier machine. That should cover everything. There will be a world download, of course, to the creative world I demonstrated this in, and I will also leave links to the video I have about spawn chunks and the chunk loader in case you want to use that one. Because even if you don't want to have the mob switch in the spawn chunks like I have, with this machine, the zombificator and the villager breeder are actually quite useful on their own because they are quite fast and I like that. In any case, I hope it was useful for you. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments. Thanks a lot for watching, and have a good mob switching. Bye!